Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. We're very happy to celebrate two things today. First of all, the 30 years of the BEL 20, and also the 150 years, Bruno, of Degroof Petercam. So let me welcome first Sandrine Dufour, who is CFO of UCB. UCB was part of the BEL 20 as from the beginning, with a part of 4% at that moment. It's 8% today, Sandrine. Sandrine has also been CFO and interim CEO of Proximus, so she knows a lot about BEL 20 companies. And Bruno Coleman, nobody knows him, of course, but he is CEO of Degroof Petercam and also very often giving his expert advice for governments, but also for investors. And Bruno will certainly also contribute a lot in the history of the BEL 20. Now, about the history of the BEL 20, I was a stockbroker in 91 when the BEL 20 was launched. I was not yet working for the stock exchange, that came a year after, but of course I saw a lot of the history of this benchmark for the Belgian market. Now, why was the BEL 20 created? It was very simple. There was the launch of the derivative markets, BELFOX, and other markets like France and the Netherlands had already launched the CAC 40 and the AEX in order to cover, in fact, investments in the respective markets, so the French market, the Dutch market, and in this case, the Belgian market. So what was the philosophy of the start? It was to take the biggest companies, the most representative companies, to allow for institutional investors, but also eventually private investors, to invest in one basket through futures or to cover their portfolio through options in the index. Now, why 20 companies? Because, of course, when you create an index like that, you need to combine representativity and liquidity. Because if you want to trade a basket, to buy and to sell 20 companies at once, it was before the artificial intelligence or the automatic execution of orders. Well, we needed to have an easy-to-trade basket, which was completely correlated with the, or at least at 95 to 99% with the global index of that period. And so it was decided to create a basket a bit like a portfolio, like an investor would invest in Belgian shares, representative and liquid. Now, the principle in the beginning was that they attributed about 7.5% to the 4 biggest companies, 2.5% to the 4 smallest companies, and about 5% to the mid layer of the index. The reason was that when an investor invests in a basket, he doesn't care too much about the size of the company. Well, yes, because he will take it because it's liquid, but he will, of course, be more equivalent in his investment, more than taking into account the size. So that was the very beginning of the index, and that index was in fact created by the godfather, by the creator of the index, which was Jean Peter Broek. And That's why we have Bruno here as CEO of Degroof Petercam. It was a real important moment because the BEL 20 at the beginning was something new. Today, everybody speaks about the Belgian market through the BEL 20. So, Bruno, do you know something about the role of Jean-Peter Broek as founding father?
Yes, of course. I know a lot about him, but I would like first to say that I'm quite glad to be back home here. We had the opportunity, Vincent and I, to co-chair the stock market during the big crisis of '08. I was myself the former CEO, and it was a nice period of my life. I would like also to say that this year will mark the 150th anniversary of the Degroof Petercam. And since that time, Degroof Petercam has been associated with the stock market. Since its origin, Degroof Petercam has been an entrepreneurial company linked to the Industrial Revolution. It went through several wars, and it joined forces 5 years ago with Petercam, that itself got created in 1919 after the First World War. Today, we are a very important operator on the Belgian market, but not only in Belgium, but also abroad, with private banking, asset management, investment banking activities. And I would like, as you say, to pay tribute to Jean-Peter Broek. Jean-Peter Broek was a mentor to me. He was one of the founding partners of what became Petercam. And I would say that his spirit is still floating around the company. He passed away, unfortunately, in 2011, but he's still there. His name is there. And his family is still shareholders of the Degroof Petercam. So we have multiple reasons to remember him, not only because he was the founder of the BEL 20, but also because he created one of the most amazing stock brokerage house of this country.
For sure. Thank you, Bruno. So let's pass to the companies that are part of the BEL 20. UCB in 91, so in fact the base is the 30th of December 90, was 4% of the BEL 20, represented 4% of the BEL 20. Today, UCB is still there. It's one of the 5 survivors. And by the way, the market capitalization or the influence of the 5 companies that are still in the BEL 20 was at that moment 25%. So 75% has been replaced by other companies. Now, Sandrine, you have experience with Proximus, you have experience with UCB. What is the symbolic importance of for a company to be part of the BEL 20?
Well, thank you, Vincent, first for the invitation to celebrate this event. It's an honor for me. So indeed, talking about UCB, worth mentioning it's a company which has been listed when it was founded in 1928. And it is indeed, as you said, part of the BEL 20 since the foundation. Only 5 companies which were at the origin are still in the BEL 20, and UCB is one of them. So it definitely has a symbolic importance to be part of the index. When you think about the size, it's really between number 4, number 5 in terms of market cap weight in the index. To your point, it represents 8% of the volume, which means that it's taking a significant part of the traded exchange on the stock market. But maybe allow me a quick, reminder of what UCB is about for those who do not know the company. UCB is a biopharma company, global and Belgian biopharma company, which is committed to bring innovative therapies and solutions to address significant unmet needs to people living with severe chronic diseases. Last year, 3.5 million patients were positively impacted by products from UCB. It generated 5.3 billion of revenue, and the company spent 29% of these revenues in R&D. I think everyone knows what development of drugs is these days, and the company has a very strong late-stage pipeline of assets with 5 assets in development. So being in the BEL 20, having this position, bringing the, as you said, the visibility and the liquidity, and representing this part of the index is significant and important.
UCB is, of course, a family-based company. Does it confirm, by being in the BEL 20, the Belgian anchorage of UCB? You are French.
Indeed, but I can speak about this. Indeed, it's a very strong Belgian anchorage. You know, UCB, the original name, stands for Union Chimique Belge. So even though the chemical business were sold 15 years ago, it has Belgium deeply rooted in the company. It was founded by a Belgian entrepreneur, Emmanuel Janssen. The reference shareholder is the Janssen family. They reside in Belgium. They encourage the headquarters of the company to remain in Belgium. And whilst the company expanded internationally, whilst most of the revenue is done abroad, the key R&D and employment center is in Belgium. We are headquartered in Brussels. Our R&D manufacturing are in Braine-l'Alleud. We acquired last year a gene therapy company, which is based in Leuven. We have a deeply rooted presence in the Belgium biopharma valley, which is a successful ecosystem in partnership with the authorities, federal and regional. And we also have a strong commitment with the local communities. Last year, just to give an example, we created a fund which is called UCB Health Community Fund, which support projects which are going to take care and analyze the long-term consequences of COVID-19 on the young vulnerable population. So just, you know, being part of the BEL 20 with this deep-rooted Belgium anchorage is definitely something which is very important.
Now, how is this perceived by investors? Because you have a lot of contacts with investors. Is it important for them? Does it change something, or is it neutral?
Well, when you think of the health sector in the BEL 20, it's the number 3 in terms of sector and weight in the index. And I think this is quite unique if you compare this with other country indexes. It represents around, you will correct me, but I think around 15% of the total index. And so when some investors are looking at UCB, they look at it being part of this sector alongside other biopharma, biotech companies such as argenx or Galapagos. So that's one dimension. On the other side, and you know, the company being known to have this reference shareholder with sustainability, long-term perspective, the company also attracts many retail investors. They represent 6% of our shareholder base, which means 10% of the free float, which is quite significant. And when you think of our purpose is to improve the life of patients. All decisions within UCB starts considering the patient. And if you align the perspective of the patient with the perspective of the management, with the perspective of the shareholder, then we are quite happy to have a retail-based shareholder, which may include some of the patients we serve.
Yeah, the health sector today represents more than 20% of the BEL 20. So it's clearly something which is different from other countries, because classically you have the utilities, you have the oil companies or the energy companies, as well as financial sector, of course, in Belgium or in other countries. Now, does it provide some visibility and credibility still for UCB in general, and especially perhaps for people working at UCB?
So indeed, it provides visibility, credibility. I mean, I know that some fund managers, they will only invest in Belgium in the BEL 20 companies. It also has what I would call a halo effect. You know, we are issuing bonds on the Euronext markets. It opened the door to, I would say, a large, high-quality pool of bond investors as well. And to your point on the employee side, UCB is driven by science and by the development of intellectual property. And in other words, it's the quality and the differentiated aspect of our, groundbreaking discoveries made by the researchers. And so being in the BEL 20 is a key tool to attract, retain, share the value, incentivize the employees to the creation of value brought by the development of intellectual property. And if I can conclude with a more personal note, I've been working in the CAC 40, in a CAC 40 company in France for 16 years. I don't think that I would have moved to Belgium if it was not to join a BEL 20 company, previously Proximus, and last year when I changed from Proximus to UCB. So I'm convinced that, for many of my colleagues, it is a pride to work in a company with such a visibility from a stock market point of view.
Thank you very much, Sandrine. Let me remind you that you can ask questions, that you can send your questions through the website. You have a button that you can do. Sandrine, thank you very much. We will also welcome now Catherine van den Borre, who is CFO of Elia, who joined the BEL 20 again today. But Bruno, let's talk a bit about the BEL 20 as an investment. The BEL 20 is, let's say that if we look at the return of the BEL 20 over these 30 years, we come to an average of 7.64% exactly. So, which is, if you look at it yearly, it's a very good performance. We had a high in 2007, more specifically the 23rd of May, at 4,756.82 to be precise. The best daily performance was on the 13th of March 2003 with a raise of 9.78%. And quite recently, the 12th of March, so again in March, so it's a special month, a loss of 14.2% due to the COVID crisis. And we saw also a lot of retail investors entering them into the market. So they have learned about previous crashes, and I think they've done a good investment last year. Now, what can you say about BEL 20 as an investment?
I think that it all depends on your time horizon, but somebody who wants to invest long term should be invested into equities, that's for sure. And if you take the return of the BEL 20, you end up having your first stake 30 years ago being multiplied by 9. Whereas if you had invested in bond, it would have been by 6. So definitely there is an advantage in being invested in equities. And the reason is the following. When you invest into equities, you take a risk. That's called the risk premium, meaning that you underpay your investment because you are supposed to take on risk. And one day you will capture the risk premium. The only question an investor has to ask himself is to know when this risk premium will be captured. And nobody knows. Nobody has the answer for that. Which means that you should invest long term because obviously one knows that in the long term, the risk premium will be captured. The investor will be rewarded for the risk he has taken on in the first place. So definitely it's a very good idea to invest into equities. Of course, I was saying it depends on your time horizon. Somebody who is getting older may want to secure part of his wealth into more bonds and less equities, but somebody who starts investing in the 30s, the 40s, even in the 50s, should invest heavily into equities. And the BEL 20 is a very good investment for that because we have a variety of societies being listed. As you rightly said, only 25% of the original shares are still in there. 75% are new, which means that the BEL 20 itself reflects the turnover of the Belgian economy.
Is there still appetite from investors, national or international investors, on products of the BEL 20? We know that today there are about 150 products, which is, let's say, 3 times more than 5 years ago, which is perhaps remarkable in
Yes.
this period where we have a lot of international investments or sectorial investments. Still, there are 5 times more products on the BEL 20 than before.
Yes, there is an appetite for that. And the reason is the following. Today, when one builds a portfolio up, the idea is to make sure that the risk is well diversified across regions, sectors, geographies, currencies. And somebody would want to have, I would say, a Lego piece of the Belgian economy would pick up the BEL 20 because the BEL 20 reflects, not perfectly though, the Belgian economy. So somebody wants to diversify its portfolio at a European scale or even a worldwide scale will pick up the BEL 20 as being the reference for the Belgian economy. And we should not forget that the Belgian economy is one of the most, I would say, profitable per capita of the world, one of the richest in the world, and which means that there will be always appetite for the BEL 20.
Yes, that was also a question which is, of course, always coming back about does the BEL 20 represent the Belgian economy? What is the difference between the Belgian economy and the BEL 20? Because, yes, you have companies that are really very local, like Colruyt or Proximus, but you have also companies, the biggest ones, like AB InBev, where the dependence on the Belgian economy is quite limited. On the other side, we have an open economy, and we know that the world economy is influencing our economy too. So what do you think as a professor?
I would say that your last point is probably the most important one. Today we live in an economy, especially in Belgium, that is quite open to the outside world, which means that confining your investment to purely Belgian local players wouldn't make any sense. It could be true for big companies operating in big countries like in the US, but that's not the case for a very open economy like the BEL 20. The BEL 20 is made out of the most traded, liquid companies, which means that there will always be a bias towards big companies, detrimental to the smallest one. But at the same time, one who invests into the BEL 20 wants liquid investments because you want to make sure that you capture the liquidity premium of your investment. So I would say that, as a conclusion, the BEL 20 does not reflect the Belgian economy as a whole, but does reflect what is listed in Belgium, knowing that the Belgian companies operate, for many of them, more in the outside world than in Belgium. So it's a good proxy, not perfect, for the Belgian economy.
Thank you, Bruno. We have also a question from the public, from a certain Bart. Not say his family name. Why the BEL 20 doesn't count its dividends into the return as the DAX does? We know that the DAX has, of course, a much better performance as the BEL 20, but the difference lies in the fact that they count the dividends in the index. Now, first of all, you have to know that you can find return indices of the BEL 20. We have 2 return indexes, the gross return index, which is more designated for institutional investors, and the retail return or the net return index, where a private investor, a retail investor, can easily compare his performance with the index by reinvesting the companies. For investors, would it be an idea to go for a return index, even if it exists, but to make it more the benchmark than the classical index where dividends are taken
From a pure academic perspective, I would keep the classical index, because the question is to know what is the dividend for an investor. The withholding tax is, of course, retained for retail investors, but we know that corporates can recuperate the withholding tax. So if there would be one fine-tuned index, including the dividends, it should factor in the average withholding tax being captured by the government when a dividend is being paid out. And that's the trick, because if you take an average withholding tax, it will be neither good for all parties. Retail investors would say the index performs better than my portfolio because I'm subject to a 30% withholding tax, whereas corporate would say I can recuperate anything. So I would keep it as it is today.
Thank you, Bruno. So let's turn now to the old newcomer. Elia is part of the 8 companies in the history of the index that came back to the index, and you rang the bell this morning to celebrate this. It was really today that Elia started again. So what is your feeling, Catherine?
Well, of course, at Elia we are very proud to be re-included in the BEL 20. I think it's really an honor to be listed in this index, which capture, let's say, the largest companies that brings value to the Belgian society. And I see that as a recognition of the growth path we have initiated 5 years ago. I also think that this feeling is shared by all Elia staff. Most of the members of our personnel are also shareholders of the company, and seeing that your company is doing well on the stock exchange is a nice recognition of your work, your commitment, and your value to society. So it's a very nice achievement thanks to the effort of all the staff of Elia.
Thank you, Catherine. You have a lot of experience as CFO. Now, what is your experience of the difference of what is being in, what is being out? Mm-hmm. What does it change for a company? Well, what does it change for the investor relations with CFOs?
I think first is visibility, and it was already mentioned by Sandrine before, but our growth across Europe, which is deeply rooted in Belgium, will benefit from even higher visibility from the investors. And for us, that's quite important because, like you know, we are at the heart of the energy transition. We will invest close to 8 billion in the next 5 years. And so we believe that being included in the BEL 20 will facilitate the contact with the investors, and so will facilitate our ambition to develop a grid at the center of Europe that will be the backbone of a low carbon energy system. That's one element. And second element, we already discussed that, pride at our employees, which as a consequence facilitates also the hiring of new people and talented people, not only in the finance function, but more globally, more generally across the different functions of the company.
For sure, it's something that we hear sometimes. It's also part of being listed because it changes completely the way that a company is run, of course, and especially how it attracts good people to run. Now, are you going to leverage a bit in your marketing to be back in the BEL 20? Because I think it's an important milestone, and it's something that you can show to your investors and attract probably new investors.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good question. And already when the news was announced last week, we already received positive feedback from the investors, the board of directors, the employees. We had a lot of attention from the press. We were even on the front page of some newspapers together with Melexis. And I think that the announcement of newcomers in the BEL 20 is something the general public is interested in, and especially know that so many people are actively trading on Euronext. And yes, we will continue to make use of the announcements in our corporate communication. The most important is also that we will keep focusing on the execution of the strategy that we have defined, and so that we hope we will stay in the index for a long period of time, at least for the next 30 years.
Well, if we look at the performance, of course, when you have newcomers in the BEL 20, that is because the performance was extremely well. And we know that for Elia, I remember when Elia was listed, because I'm a bit already a veteran of the exchange, it was considered as being a sort of indexed bond. But when you look at what happened, what in fact probably the listing gave as a booster for the company, I can only congratulate the management and be very happy to see such a company, which is also very important for the future, because electricity and sustainability is part of our future. So, Catherine, thank you very much.
Thank you
and
very
we
much.
will also be happy to welcome Melexis in a few minutes.
Thank you.
First, let me ask a question to Bruno on the investor side. How does, for you, the BEL 20 compare to the AEX and the CAC 40, to name the most known one in our country?
Well, if you take the long-term perspective, and I'm talking starting when the BEL 20 got created by Jean-Peter Broek, we see that the Dutch index performed better than the BEL 20 and also than the French index. That's due mostly to the composition of the indices, because you cannot compare one index with another one if you don't factor in the same weighting to all shares, obviously. Because if you would take one country where the banks would be predominant and another one where industrials would be the most traded assets, you couldn't compare the sector. So that pleads for a wider diversification when one wants to invest into equities, because even if an index reflects a local economy, it will never be enough to cover all sectors that you want to put in your equity portfolio.
Yeah, for sure. And now let's go to the difficult questions, the questions that I've heard since I'm in the exchange, because the BEL 20 existed when I started in the exchange. Why 20? Why not 10, what traders ask? And why not 30, like companies ask? Because, of course, everybody wants to be part of it.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, the BEL 20 has to have between 10 and 20 shares. It can go down to 10, if I'm not mistaken, which means, and sometimes, if you do remember, Vincent, when we were working together here at the stock market, we had one time 19, if not 18 shares making up the BEL 20. That's a long debate, because if you take other indexes like the CAC 40, the DAX 30, and that will become, I think, even the DAX 50 at some point in time, because they are the two, I would say that it's a small one. 20 is small compared to the peers. So there's a case for increasing the number of shares in order to get more diversification, to get a better reflection of the Belgian economy. At the same time, the opposite argument can be used, because some people pleaded, I would say 10, 15 years ago, to have, beside the BEL 20, a BEL 7 or 9 index, which means that that would be the highest traded companies of the country. Because the debate is there. If you have 20 companies in the BEL 20, some of them are more liquid than other ones, which means that if you want to acquire the basket of the BEL 20, you may get a friction for the less liquid shares. So there's a case for increasing to get more diversification, and there's a case for decreasing to have the highest liquid assets. And that will be a never-ended debate because there's no solution, there's no formal solution to this problem.
So the best solution is probably no change at this moment, but we have to adapt, and we did it also in the history of the BEL 20. We always adapted the rules to the evolution of the environment, of the ecosystem of the listed companies, because a lot happened, of course. At a certain moment, on a very short time, we lost about 10 companies of the BEL 20 that had to be replaced, of course, by smaller companies. So that's why the rules evaluated, and now today we have rules that are very much in conformity with the international indices. Another difficult question is, well, since we have since Euronext, in fact, we have a single order book between the Netherlands, France, and Belgium, and that means that multi-listed companies comply already with the liquidity criteria because they are big companies, and if they're multi-listed, they should be included immediately. So we have rules now, which have been simplified to the fact that they need 15% of the staff in Belgium. But what do you think about including not Belgian companies in the index?
There's also a long debate without any solution, because we all know that the rules have been tightened since 5 years ago. I would say that if I would buy the BEL 20, I would expect to buy mostly Belgian-rooted companies with activities in Belgium. But, as I was mentioning earlier, a big Belgian company will, at some point in time, because we are living a very small and open economy, have foreign operations. Like InBev. InBev, of course, is a Belgian-rooted company, but at the same time, only, I think, 3 to 5% of the turnover of InBev is being made in Belgium. So there's a debate. Do we want Belgian-rooted companies with foreign operations, or do we want purely Belgian operators in order to clarify what an investor would buy? And I would say again that if you would try to solve the debate, you should have two indices. One that would be only focused on Belgian companies operating mostly in Belgium, and another index where it would be the Belgian companies listed in Belgium, whatever the turnover they make in Belgium. So it's an endless debate. I think the rules are so that if a company is not Belgian enough, it would be put out of the BEL 20, like it happened for ING. And Elia, by the way, took the place of ING, rightfully so. But the case has been always debated. For InBev, I remember we had this debate long ago. Should InBev be in the index because of the small operations it has in our country? It's an open debate. And we had the same debate for NG, because NG has been and still maybe today, not anymore, in the BEL 20. And the question was to know, why would a French company be part of the BEL 20? And the answer was, at that time, because the electricity produced by NG is important to the Belgian economy. So again, there's no final solution to that.
Yeah, for NG it was very clear because, in fact, in NG, because of takeovers,
yes,
there were 3 BEL 20 included in NG with Electrabel, Tractebel, and Société Générale. So, well, in Suez at that moment, but it made sense, and there was a lot of liquidity also in Belgium because we saw at that moment the liquidity in Belgium. But it's a debate, and the reason why we take foreign companies that are representative in Belgium, you must know that, of course, it goes always about very big companies. And if 15% of the staff is working in Belgium of a very big multinational company, we can really say that it is representative of the Belgian economy and certainly of the feeling of the Belgians. But now let me welcome Karen van Griensven, CFO of Melexis, a first time. So what is the feeling that you have today after ringing the bell of your inclusion in the BEL 20?
So yeah, obviously we are happy and proud that after many years being very close to inclusion in the BEL 20, we now eventually made it. And for Melexis, yeah, this is definitely a good thing towards branding. We are a B2B company, so still with investors in Belgium we are quite known, but in the big public we are still not known everywhere. And the inclusion in the BEL 20 will definitely give us a bit more visibility again in the Belgian press, which then can benefit the attraction of high-level profiles that we all search for. And next to that, it will also improve the liquidity of the share, which is quite all right, but we still can improve definitely also further in making our share more liquid. And inclusion in the BEL 20 for sure helps there as well.
I can imagine that the company is proud. Are you doing a sort of event? Well, we can't do events, of course, perhaps a virtual event to celebrate this?
We will make it a celebration, but after we can go back into the office for sure, within management and also within the broader company. But of course we will publish this. We will give this a lot of attention within Melexis in our communication channels that we have today. But the party will have to wait, unfortunately.
What do you think? How can we render perhaps the BEL 20 more technology-driven?
Yeah, today it is. Yeah, it's a bit less banking now than a year ago. But indeed, technology, biotechnology is quite well represented. Other technology companies probably, we definitely could still do better there in Belgium. But nevertheless, with semiconductors, with Melexis, we now have a semiconductor in the BEL 20, and I think we can be proud about it. If you look at it, semiconductors is today at the heart of a technology war, where even presidents are getting involved to protect their industry. Luckily, Europe is also well positioned when it comes to semiconductors. All the neighboring countries, Germany has a major, has big stakeholders in semiconductor, but Infineon there is the biggest one. The Netherlands have several semiconductor companies, big ones. And also France, of course, is there. So now Melexis also counts in the BEL 20, a semiconductor company. And I believe we can be proud about that. Next to that, obviously, we should still groom more technology companies in Belgium. And of course, where to start? The best way to start is to start with having more and more students into the STEM directions. And also Melexis, and then particularly our CEO, is definitely trying to improve the situation there in Belgium and in Europe as such. So, yes, I think with that, I have answered hopefully the question.
Yeah, for sure. So, if we look at the evolution of the Melexis share price, it is quite impressive. It's about 10 times what it was 10 or 20 years ago, or even less, 15 years ago. Did you see an effect on the short term since the announcement of Melexis entering the BEL 20?
Indeed, the share price on the day of, in the morning or the day of announcement, the share price went up 5%. Now, the market in general also improved that day, but not as much. It was more in the range of 3%, where Melexis grew 5%. So there was clearly a positive effect of the announcement on the share price.
But as you know, we always think on the long term, and we hope that Melexis will take that opportunity of being in the BEL 20, of growing further like they did the past years with schwung, and to be very representative of the Belgian tech economy, which is very nice. I have still a question of the public, which is also interesting, certainly on the investor side, but also on the company side. What about a more sustainable BEL 20? Because today, investors are more looking to sustainability, sustainable investments. How or do the BEL 20 have to change its rules to become more sustainable? Or what is the future for this?
No, it's a good question, if I may answer. As you know, most financial institutions, and by the way, this is what we are doing at Degroof Petercam, are making sure that we do invest on behalf of our clients into sustainable investments. But then if you would create a BEL whatever that would be a sustainable index, I think it may discriminate some companies that do not have the same time horizon in order to become sustainable. And that would create a highly volatile investment. In addition to that, one would have to create criteria to make sure that this sustainable company would be in or out of scope, which would make things difficult. So I wouldn't say it's a good idea. I would rely more on the ability and the moral commitment of companies being part of the BEL 20 to become sustainable and to acquire an individual label that would make them qualified as sustainable rather than using the index in order to separate them. That would be my humble point of view.
What about companies? Sustainability is more and more important. Do you feel it also for investors?
Of course, yes, indeed. Also, Melexis, at heart, we've always been a sustainable company. The products we make are clearly adding value towards sustainability. But indeed, we need to give more and more transparency, and it needs to be part of DNA and in continuous decision-taking, so that we indeed can make this planet a better place to live. Yes.
I think also that the BEL 20 is quite sustainable in general.
Probably.
If you look at the companies, it is already quite
yes.
well sustainable in that side. So we are coming to the end of this webinar. Perhaps a last question for Bruno. What do you think of the BEL 20? What will it be in 10 years, 20 years, and especially 30 years?
I hope I will still be living in 30 years. Definitely, there will be a BEL something in the future. Will it be a BEL 20, a BEL 25, a BEL 30? It will all depend on the ability of the Belgian economy to develop itself, to have listed companies. Of course, if we can create national champions, there will be more companies into the BEL index. If we lose our corporate center, that would be the opposite. So definitely it will reflect the ability of the Belgian economy to keep local successful entrepreneurs. That's the key. But if I can make a guess, I would say that between decreasing the scope of the BEL 20 down to 5 or 10, or increasing the scope, I would favor the increasing scope, and I would say that we may expect the BEL 30 in the future. That would be my best guess.
Thank you, Bruno. You will be certainly very popular with the companies that are listed in Brussels. So, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our webinar about 30 years of the BEL 20 and 150 years of Degroof Petercam. Let me again welcome our newcomers of today, Melexis and Elia, both represented by women. So that means that diversity is really coming into our national index. Thank you for being here. Thank you for assisting, and have a good day. Have a good week.